What if I told you that the chaos in Las Vegas became so severe that Formula One drivers themselves exploded against the governing body after seeing the exact same infrastructure failure that destroyed a Ferrari chassis 2 seasons ago return in the most dangerous way imaginable? Everyone saw the red flag, but almost no one realized the truth behind it. Cars were running at full speed over a manhole cover that was visibly moving under them, right after the FIA declared the track safe. And in the middle of this disaster, Lewis Hamilton was battling serious stability issues with his Ferrari SF25, issues that became even worse because every red flag ruined the tire warm-up window he needed to control the car. Stay with me, because once you understand what the drivers said behind closed doors after FP2, you will see why this incident has sparked one of the strongest revolts against the FIA in recent years. The second practice session in Las Vegas did not simply produce a red flag. It produced a moment that made every driver stop and realize that the same infrastructure failure that destroyed a Ferrari 2 seasons earlier had returned in almost identical fashion. The session began on a surface still damp from earlier rainfall, temperatures close to 10 degrees Celsius and grip levels far below anything normally seen on a Formula One weekend. Drivers expected difficulty. They did not expect danger. When the first reports of a loose manhole near turn 17 emerged, the paddock sensed the tension immediately. This part of the circuit is one of the fastest on the entire calendar, and anything unstable beneath the car becomes a direct threat at those speeds. When the FIA halted the session, inspected the manhole and declared the surface safe, most drivers accepted the decision at face value. They trusted that the governing body had performed the rigorous checks required after what happened in 2023. Yet the short inspection window raised eyebrows, and many engineers privately questioned whether a static check could ever measure the forces generated by a modern Formula One car. The announcement that everything was secure came as a relief, but it was a relief wrapped in doubt. Drivers prepared to return to the track knowing they had only a few minutes left to complete their performance runs, and that placed enormous pressure on conditions that were already unforgiving. As cars went back out, the tension did not fade. Teams watched closely from the pit wall because the session had become a race against the clock rather than a methodical evaluation. Tires were cooling faster than drivers could warm them. The surface remained inconsistent and slick. And the manhole that had supposedly been inspected was still a topic of whispered conversations up and down the grid. Within moments, Charles Leclerc encountered a sudden gearbox issue and had to pull over behind the barriers, adding another layer of uncertainty for Ferrari at the worst possible moment. His mechanical problem was unexpected and unfortunate, but what happened immediately afterwards changed the tone of the entire night. Only minutes after the FIA declared the track safe, the personnel who had stayed near the manhole reported that the cover was moving every time a car passed at high speed. That discovery transformed cautious concern into outright alarm. The FIA responded by deploying a second red flag, and with that decision, the entire session came to a complete stop. Drivers who had spent the evening battling cold tires and unstable grip now faced an entirely different challenge, understanding how they had been allowed to drive over a piece of track infrastructure that was visibly unstable. The sense of déjà vu from 2023 was impossible to ignore, especially for those who remembered how catastrophic the previous failure had been. The conversation inside the paddock shifted instantly from performance to safety, because the situation revealed something drivers do not often express publicly: anger. They were frustrated that a critical safety risk had been missed during the first inspection and furious that they had been sent back out while the danger was still present. Several drivers reported through their teams that the trust between them and the governing body had taken a significant hit. When you are driving at more than 300 kilometers per hour, confidence in the track surface is non-negotiable, and that confidence evaporated the moment the truth of the second red flag became known. For Lewis Hamilton, this created a layered crisis. His Ferrari SF25 was already struggling with tire temperature, aerodynamic sensitivity, and balance issues on a track that punished every weakness. The red flags made those weaknesses even harder to manage. Each interruption cooled the tires, disrupted rhythm, and forced him into rushed preparation laps that never allowed the car to stabilize. By the end of the session, Hamilton had not been able to complete a single competitive lap on soft tires, and the data Ferrari gathered was fragmented at best. What should have been a crucial session for refining the setup became a night defined by uncertainty, frustration, and a growing sense among drivers that the FIA had misjudged a situation that demanded absolute caution. The central problem that ignited the anger of Formula One drivers in Las Vegas was not a simple red flag or a minor track discrepancy. The real problem was that the governing body allowed cars to accelerate at full speed over a manhole cover that had not been structurally validated under racing load. Drivers depend on predictable conditions to control machines that generate thousands of kilograms of aerodynamic force, and the moment this stability is compromised, safety becomes a matter of luck rather than procedure. What stunned the paddock was that the track had already suffered a catastrophic manhole failure 2 seasons before, yet the same risk resurfaced despite promises of reinforced infrastructure and stricter inspections. The distrust intensified because the FIA initially halted the session, inspected the surface and declared the circuit safe, only to discover minutes later that the manhole was visibly moving under the pressure of passing cars. This created the impression that the first inspection was incomplete and that the decision to restart the session had been made with urgency rather than certainty. Drivers felt their safety had been taken for granted, and many expressed privately that the standard for declaring a track safe had fallen below what they considered acceptable. A red flag due to poor weather or debris is understandable. A red flag because a structural element of the circuit is shifting under the car is a completely different matter. The second layer of the problem emerged from the timing of the failures. Both red flags occurred during the final minutes of the session, precisely when drivers were attempting their crucial performance runs. This made the situation even more volatile because the interruption not only endangered them but also erased their chance to gather essential data ahead of qualifying. Drivers who needed multiple laps to bring tires into the heat window suddenly found themselves with no track time left and no rhythm to rely on. That frustration quickly turned into outrage once they learned that the second red flag was not caused solely by Charles Leclerc's stoppage, but by the repeated failure of the same manhole that had just been declared safe. For Lewis Hamilton, the problem had an additional dimension because the SF25 was particularly vulnerable to temperature swings in the cold Las Vegas night. Each interruption caused tire temperatures to collapse, and regaining the performance window required laps he never had. He entered each attempt with colder tires, less grip, and a car that reacted sharply to every surface inconsistency. His preparatory laps were repeatedly compromised, leaving him unable to complete even a single representative push lap on soft tires. The mechanical grip he needed never materialized, and Ferrari could not separate environmental noise from genuine car behavior due to the lack of continuous running. The situation grew worse when Hamilton nearly collided with Nico Hülkenberg at high speed during one of the few laps where his tires were approaching usability. The lighting contrasts of the strip and the massive speed differences between push laps and cool-down laps created a moment where a misjudgment could have resulted in disaster. To Hamilton, this near collision was not an isolated incident but a symptom of a session that had become chaotic and unsafe. Every driver leaving the garage was navigating an unpredictable combination of cold tires, unstable grip, and compromised visibility. When you add a moving manhole cover to that formula, frustration becomes inevitable. At the heart of the outrage was a belief shared by many drivers that the FIA should never have restarted the session after the first red flag unless the structural integrity of the surface had been tested under realistic load. Drivers made it clear that the margin for error in a street circuit at night is already minimal, and additional risks cannot be tolerated. This is why so many voices inside the paddock described the incident as unacceptable. And before moving on, here is the direct question for you. If you were in the cockpit at more than 300 km per hour and learned afterward that a structural element beneath you had been visibly shifting, would you have trusted the decision to resume the session, or would you have demanded a full track-wide inspection before continuing? Your answer reveals the threshold of safety you believe this sport must uphold. The engineering challenge that erupted in Las Vegas forced teams to confront a reality they hoped never to face again. The manhole movement beneath the track surface created a dynamic instability that today's ground effect cars are extremely vulnerable to. These machines depend on a precise aerodynamic seal between the floor and the asphalt, and even a tiny vertical displacement can disrupt airflow, destabilize the chassis, and trigger violent oscillations. Engineers watching the telemetry saw irregular spikes in vertical load as cars passed over the compromised section, and those anomalies confirmed that the surface was no longer delivering the consistency required for safe operation. It was a mechanical reminder that even the best car in the world cannot function when the track itself fails. Inside the Ferrari garage, the disruption created a much deeper engineering problem for Lewis Hamilton. The SF25 is a car that relies heavily on stable tire temperature to unlock balance, but every red flag reset that temperature back to levels far below the operating window. This forced Hamilton to attempt multiple preparation laps, and each attempt increased tire wear, degraded the surface, and delayed the moment when the tires could deliver peak performance. With cold asphalt, low grip, and shortened running, Ferrari could not generate the heat Hamilton needed. His tires cycled between too cold on entry and too fragile under load, a combination that robbed him of confidence during the medium-speed corners that define the Las Vegas layout. The track interruptions also undermined Ferrari's simulation models. The team had arrived with a data plan built around long sequences of laps needed to evaluate downforce distribution, traction mapping and differential behavior. Instead, the engineers received fragmented information from incomplete runs where conditions changed rapidly. With the manhole shifting and grip levels evolving as the surface dried, the correlation between simulations and real-world behavior collapsed. Ferrari depends on a tight loop between prediction and reality, but Las Vegas created a gap so large that engineers had to abandon several planned test paths and instead rely on instinct and Hamilton's feedback to shape the direction of the setup. The cold conditions magnified every weakness of the SF25. The car traditionally struggles to generate heat on circuits with long straights and slow corner sequences because energy dissipates faster than it builds. Las Vegas added the challenge of inconsistent surface temperature caused by earlier rainfall, and this forced Ferrari to adjust brake duct sizes, engine braking levels and electrical deployment strategies to create extra thermal input. Even with these adjustments, the tires continued to cool during every out lap or red flag period, leaving Hamilton with a car that felt disconnected and unpredictable. Each attempt to push came with a risk of snap oversteer caused by insufficient rear temperature, something that Hamilton reported clearly to his race engineer as the session deteriorated. One of the most telling signs of the car's instability came during Hamilton's near collision with Nico Hülkenberg. Telemetry later showed that this moment occurred exactly when Hamilton's tires were closest to entering the usable temperature range. The high closing speed and the sudden appearance of a slower car on the racing line forced Hamilton to abandon what could have been his only meaningful push lap. From an engineering standpoint, this was a critical loss because the team never captured the baseline they needed to validate their performance model. With no clean laps on soft tires and compromised laps even on mediums, Ferrari finished the session with data that lacked consistency, completeness, and context, leaving them technically blind heading into final practice.